In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, God is one. Amen. Well, good morning, everybody. I can see there are 3 or 4 of us there now, which is very nice. Every now and again, YouTube decides to change the way that it works. And today, without warning, without anything at all, they've changed it again, which is extremely irritating when they do that. But never mind, so it's taken a little bit of time to get used to and see what's going on. Anyway, there we are. It's a sort of cloudy, overcast day after 2 days of brilliant sunshine. Sunday was very beautiful, really very beautiful, and we're very lucky to have that. And then yesterday was a very beautiful day as well. Unfortunately, I spent most of the day feeling really poorly, very dizzy and heady and strange and sick and all the rest of it. So the one decent day so far the whole summer when I could have enjoyed a bit of outsideness, I was feeling like nothing on earth, but there we go. Dear, oh dear, oh dear. Never mind, just had to put up with this nonsense. Anyway, you can see Joan there. Good morning. Hope you're having a nice cup of coffee, maybe a donut and other things. And Miss Connie, good evening. Perhaps you're beginning to cuddle up next to a nice roaring fire as the Australian winter begins to take hold, and drinking a cup of warming cocoa. I don't know, it might be roasting hot where you are. I have no idea really. Jonathan, woohoo! Nice to see you there. That's not so common. You must have a moment to yourself. There's a great thing. Jonathan brought with him a man on Saturday who turned out to be a plasterer. He's now plastered the wall that needed plastering, which I'm absolutely thrilled to bits about, because now we can get on and start decorating those 2 rooms and putting up a nice shrine to St. Aristobulus, who was the first Archbishop of Great Britain, or first bishop in Britain, and an apostle of the 70. Miss Connie, I'm fine now, thank you. Penelope, good morning, God bless you. And Suzanne, thank you very much. You donuts are made are always for clients, not me. Oh, should one trust anybody who doesn't eat their own produce? You can't have gluten. Well, that's a nuisance. What a shame. So you can't eat any of your own cakes. Well, let me tell you about them. The one I ate was absolutely delicious. And so did everybody else, I think so, with whom I shared them. Natalia, good morning. God bless you. Frank, cooler day. Yeah, thank God. Gary, looking at nice pictures of you earlier on. You're looking to be nice and healthy. The only thing that is a problem is I haven't seen you for ages, so hopefully, God willing, before too long. Anyway, there we go. Let's crack on. I'll do that cracking straight away. Not much we're going to do today, partly because I'm feeling lazy, but also I've got a lot to crack on with myself today, and communions and other things I couldn't do yesterday I'm going to do now. And then I've got my least favourite job of the entire month, which is writing a newsletter. Never mind. There's also quite a lot in this little section here too. The car is growing old. Oh well. Acts chapter 13, verses 36 to 43. No, we're not going to do that. 36 to 39. St. Paul is still preaching to those people in Antioch. He has already started talking to them about King David, who died and saw corruption. He said that the real Messiah, the real David, the real person who's going to take over, is not going to suffer corruption. Okay? I just said that in the previous verse. For David, he says, after he had served his own generation by the will of God, fell asleep and was buried with his fathers and saw corruption. But he whom God raised up saw no corruption. Therefore, let it be known to you, brethren, that through this man is preached to you the forgiveness of sins, and by him everyone who believes is justified from all things from which you could not be justified by the law of Moses. That's as far as we're going to do today. So let's see what we can make of that. Verse 36, for David, after he had served his own generation, by the will of God, fell asleep, was buried with his fathers, and saw corruption. So David was seen by the Jewish people as being the archetypal and great example of what it meant to be a king, partly because he himself was repentant, he was humble, he sought to do God's will, and also because, being a rather warlike people, he had conquered great stretches of land, all of which aggrandized the Jewish people and made them at that time wealthy. And they were looking forward to having somebody or other who would do something similar, who would be a great conqueror, who would throw the Romans out, who would release the Jewish people from their subjection to Rome. They never, and British, after a little while, Rome conquered them, but they quite liked being conquered in the end, and didn't like it when the Romans decided to go away. It became fully Roman. But Israel, Judea, never really became Romanized in the same way. They're not prepared to compromise with their conquerors. They always wanted to throw off these, what they saw as shackles, and gain their own independence. Whereas the British, when they had it, were much more Romanized, were fully integrated into Rome, and many of the tribes, when the Romans came, actually fought alongside the Romans against the other tribes whom they hated more. And the archaeology shows that by doing so, actually living standards and everything else went up. They probably went up also in Judea, but they did not want that. Okay, so they're looking for somebody like David, and God had made promises to David that his throne would not see corruption, that his Holy One would not see corruption. And that Holy One is not King David. So St. Paul points out the promises to David were not for him. David himself saw corruption. He went rotten. Other things we can actually get from this verse as well are quite important. It's the way it says he served his own generation, whereas Christ serves every generation from the very beginning of humanity all the way through, right up until we come to the very end of time. So whereas David serves his own people, Christ serves everyone throughout all time. An important difference. Then it says that he did so by the will of God, whereas Christ, being God, does so by his own will. Then it says about King David, he fell asleep. Just as an aside, it's worthwhile noting that that is a really nice way for Christians to talk about death. We have all sorts of euphemisms nowadays in our society. Probably the most common one would be passed on, or passed over, or passed away, something like that, no longer with us. People don't like to think about somebody being dead. But there's a interesting Christian thing. It's not really a euphemism. It's a way of speaking about what death really is. It's a falling asleep in the Lord. You often find it in Victorian Anglo-Catholic and evangelical gravestones, where it says so fell asleep in the Lord, blah, 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 blah. And earlier ones often say entered into eternity. But fell asleep in the Lord is a more scriptural way of putting it. And it gives this strong idea that from falling asleep, one wakes up. Therefore, the resurrection is actually implied within that. So falling asleep in the Lord. I heard I've heard some funny ones. Obviously, Shakespeare talks about shuffling off this mortal coil and popping their clogs, where you no longer have need for your shoes, so you then take them down to the pawnbroker and sell them to the pawnbroker who died. But also recently, I heard somebody described as so-and-so. He's now wearing his, what do they call it? His wooden onesie. Ooh. I remember when I was a child, and my older brother used to talk about somebody wearing their wooden suit, but a wooden onesie is quite funny. Oh dear. The other way about talking about death is being gathered to your forefathers, and it says here, fell asleep, was buried with his forefathers, but in fact the Greek says gathered to his forefathers. And then he saw corruption. Then he molded away. Now, St. Paul is going to contrast that. I see other people turned up. Foxy Lord. That's a great name. Bev, good morning. Ahle, God bless you also. So St. Paul's going to contrast this King David, who sees corruption, who moulders in the grave, with the Lord. But he whom God raised up saw no corruption. A very strong but there. But he whom God raised up saw no corruption. And this is strongly in contrast with King David. So the people that St. Paul is talking to, they are Jewish people and they are proselytes, God-fearing people who are becoming Jewish or have become Jewish. And they will be concentrating on thinking about a future new King David. But St. Paul is saying this is somebody of a different league completely in, we said before, in the tradition of David, in the lineage of David, and so on. But this one sees no corruption. There will be no end to his rule. Okay, so with that we go back to the earlier quotation, verse 35, from Psalm 15, verse 10. You will not allow your Holy One to see corruption. So all of these things will be going round and round in the minds of people that are listening to St. Paul. So they'll be quite shocked by it as well. It's interesting, just as an aside, to note the way that St. Paul is tailoring his sermon to his audience. Very often you get preachers nowadays who don't tailor their sermon to the audience, and they wrote their sermon for what appears to be their own pleasure and entertainment. And often it's peppered with all sorts of interesting quotations from poems and writers and other people. And the audience or the congregation is sitting there looking stupefied with boredom. I can remember somebody used to, I remember one sermon listening to, I've heard it many times actually, where the preacher used the word axiomatic. He actually said, the following and penultimate point is axiomatic to my whole argument. This was to a group of 15-year-olds. I'd be interested to know how many 15-year-olds would be able to unpack that sentence. Clearly was not tailored to a group of young people like that. Anyway, there we go. So if you're going to preach the gospel, please preach it in words that people understand. My next and penultimate point, incidentally, is axiomatic to the entire gospel. And it is. Therefore, verse 38, let it be known to you, brethren, that through this man, it's actually in Greek it says one, through this one is preached to you the forgiveness of sins. Da, da, da. It is my Right, really important, isn't it? It is axiomatic. Having dealt with the death and resurrection of Christ so far, so that's what St. Paul has been talking about and running through the history of the Jewish people so far, and he now comes to what the purpose of this death and resurrection is. What is it? It is the forgiveness of sins. Wow. So, aphesis amation. That's really important, isn't it? What's the point of all this? I quite enjoy listening to prayer of the day in the morning, and then later on there's thought for the day, usually given by various ecclesiarchs, Anglicans and Baptists and all sorts of other folk, sometimes from time to time Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs and Buddhists. But rarely do they actually talk about what the purpose of Christ is. Obviously a Muslim or Hindu won't do. But it's for forgiveness. It's to make you forgiven so that you can be next to God. You can be justified, made innocent, and therefore God can overwhelm you. And you therefore get all sorts of sub-gospel themes. So it might be, today it was about taking note of history in the past and related to some sort of football game that's going on at the moment. It might be to do with climate change, it could be to do with equality, or it could be to do with the voting at the moment and taking all that seriously. All these things are important, but actually the gospel is about forgiveness. So it's worthwhile thinking for a moment what forgiveness is about. What is it? Aphesin in Greek. Aphesis here, aphesis amation, the forgiveness of sins. What does it mean? It means the forgiveness, yes, letting go. So the letting go of sins, God just lets them go. And sin is about missing the mark, it's about owing God something, a debt and so on, and God just simply lets that debt disappear. Not interested anymore. Loosing, if you have a horse tied up and you let him free or her free, you untie the horse, that is aphesin as well, letting go. It also means sending away. So I'm sending you away to go on holiday, aphesin you to go on holiday. Loosing, releasing, giving freedom to, in the same way as you give freedom to a horse to go and run around the paddock, or is it in Australia they have brumbies, they run around all over the place, living a completely free life, or somewhere like Dartmoor, Exmoor, or somewhere like that, where they are free creatures as opposed to being enslaved to us. Having freedom, to live that freedom, and then also complete pardon. Pardon, not quite, I mean that makes it sound as if the sin is still there, but you're choosing not to, to pardon it. So I find sometimes when people are given a pardon by our government for something or other done in the past, actually the pardon is not really good enough. They need to say they weren't guilty to begin with. So complete dropping of the sin as if it had never happened. Wow, and that's good, because, verse 39, and by him, so we've had through him, and now by him, everyone who believes is justified from all things for which you could not be justified by the law of Moses. Well, you know what? An awful lot of ink has been spilt talking about that particular verse and trying to work out exactly what it was that St. Paul was talking about. A lot of the Protestant Reformation develops also around verses like that. And St. Paul's writing elsewhere. This is genuine teaching of St. Paul. But what could he mean? So, first of all, let's have a look to see what it is that Moses said and what you had to do. So there are 613 laws that Moses, in inverted commas, Moses and other people promulgated that were meant to make you right with God. So you do all of these 613 things and you're fine. So some of those would be things like circumcision, kosher, all the kosher rules, of which there are many. So not eating pork, not eating things that are like rabbits that don't have cloven foot, not eating things that don't chew the cud, not eating fish that don't have scales, not eating shellfish and stuff like this, not mixing two different types of fabric together. So you don't mix cotton and wool. Back then it'd be linen and wool. You'd either have wool or you'd have linen. You don't mix the two together. Not having your hair braided, not being tattooed, etc., etc., etc. But also for men being circumcised, I think I might have said that already. And all the other rules that I have mentioned, totaling 613 of them. And then when you had done that, God's quid pro quo was you were fine with him. The only trouble was, you can't do that. And therefore you can't be fine with God. You might be able to do some, like keep the Sabbath. You might be able to do some, like be circumcised. But sure enough, along the road, you're going to find something or other that you have done wrong. And therefore you are polluted by this, therefore you can't be fine with God. You might have a mikvah, a ritual bath and stuff again afresh. But actually you always have this thing hanging over you. And by it hanging over you, St. Paul says, you're constantly aware that you are sinning and there's a gap between you and God. Okay? So you cannot be made right with God. You cannot be justified by the laws of Moses. Now, these laws were known in Judaism as good works. So you had your child circumcised, this was good work. You lived a kosher life, that was a good work. You made sure that your clothes are only made out of one fabric, that was a good work. You didn't mix meat with milk, that was a good work. You gave away a tenth of your stuff, that was a good work. But all Jewish people know that actually that doesn't do it for you. You're still separate from God. And they want to know, it's a great thing to be next to God, because that is the purpose of life. And to miss out on that means your life is not fulfilled. And that is heartbreaking, really heartbreaking. Okay? So, here we go. So what do we have instead? St. Paul is saying, but through Jesus, this justification that you're looking for, this being made innocent, being rendered just, being freed, made pure, so that your purity and God's purity can mix without anything happening to God to make God impure, which is obviously impossible, can happen. Because we can be in communion, joined organically to Christ, who is the God-man, who is God. And therefore we are next to God. We're in God, we put on God, we are surrounded by God, God is in us, and so on. So there is now no longer any gap between me and God. So this, the Greek word, I will come on to that maybe. So means made just, made innocent, made free, made pure, justified. That's what justifying means. Now, the emphasis in the Greek is on Jesus. It is by this one, okay? By him. It goes like this. En tafto, in him, pas, all, o pistevin, all believing. are made righteous. Okay? Dikaionti. And put this in another way. You can translate it, parse it more, not parse it, you can explain the words more fully in this sort of way. So, in him, everyone, all, believing in him, and St. Paul uses that word in a variety of ways, but very frequently meaning having loyalty to. Okay? Believing in him, having faith in, trusting him, but really strongly being loyal to Christ. Being loyal to Christ, have this righteousness, this justification, being made just, being made innocent, being made free, being made pure. And that justification is accomplished fully when you're baptized, but then of course it is maintained through the other sacraments. So all the other sacraments of the Church will continue with that helping you to remain justified with Christ. So these things are about a relationship with a person. It is by him and through him. Through whom? Jesus Christ, the God-man. That relationship we have with him and that organic unity we have with him in baptism and communion and so on, and the other sacraments, are what bind us to him, which then binds us to the Trinity as a whole. So this is not like keeping some rule. You keep X, Y, and Z rules. There might be 5, there might be 613, it doesn't really matter. But that is quite different, okay? Quite different. Here we have the absolute presence of Christ himself in us and around us, and we are fully attached to him. Is grace a part or a whole of this justification? Well, we think about grace as being the uncreated energies of God that come to us through the sacraments. So when I say the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you all, we're talking about something, the actual presence of God being with you. Some people think grace is a sort of activity of God, but actually grace is the uncreated energies of God that we, I don't want to get too technical here, that overwhelm us and come into us and cause that divinization, that theosis, that engodiment that takes place within a human being. Okay? Do you see the way that is different from keeping a whole series of rules? I was thinking about this when I was thinking about the Hajj that was going on recently. There's poor souls where 1,500 or something, a very large number of people, died in the heat in Saudi Arabia. Well, they're keeping 5 lots of rules. And the rules in themselves are not bad. But I was thinking, well, okay, they keep these rules and then God owes them something. But actually in Christianity, there are no rules. Not really. In Christianity, there is that absolute union with Christ. And then you do as he wants. And that takes away that whole nonsense about whether you are justified by works or by faith. You have the faith, you have the sacraments, you are in Christ, you are filled with love. Well, you know you are because you are going to do all sorts of acts of love. These are not what we call works. Works are things like being circumcised, keeping kosher rules. Those are works. That's what St. Paul means by works. Keeping the 613 laws of the Old Testament, none of which make you justified with Christ. What makes you justified with Christ is that Christ comes to us. He does the work. He does whatever needs to be done. Okay? That's the really important bit. Whew, I think we've probably come to, yes, verse 39. So, is there anything else? By him. Okay, just get this in your head. Hear what St. Paul is saying. Let it be known to you, brethren, that through this man is preached to you the forgiveness of sins. By him, everyone believes is justified from things could not be justified by the law of Moses. Deliberately going quiet on those. So, Christina, if you couldn't hear that bit, never mind. It's him, Christ. He is the one that does this work. And what we need to do is be fully loyal to him, trust in him, have faith in him, believe in him, all really the same sort of meaning. Right, enough of that. See if anybody's asked any questions here. What? Suzanne says, we are still munching on another. If we can receive a surplus, we'll pass it on. What are you munching on? Maybe you said earlier on, I missed it. Donuts? Good morning, she says. Suzanne? Suzanne, I don't know what you're talking about. I must have said something, it's a throwaway. There we go. Bonjour, Simon, ça va? It's my pleasure, Frank. Miss Connie says, thank you for your explanations about justification and grace. Much needed for silly me. Oh, something green and crispy. Maybe a lettuce. Are you growing lots of lettuces at home? Right, okay. Please don't forget to pray for everybody. And of course, woohoo, just think, only another 6 months today, and we will be celebrating Christmas. Da, da, da. So yesterday we had the feast day of the Nativity of St. John the Forerunner and Baptist, and that is the day when we begin to notice that it's getting slightly darker in the evenings, and the sunshine here is getting slightly shorter. Miss Connie, you can rush outside and begin to notice that the sunshine is getting slightly longer. Now, up in the Northern Hemisphere, the sun is related to John the Forerunner and Baptist, here now, and John looks out, as it were, and he notices that his light is beginning to wane. At Christmas time, the 25th of December is the first day when you notice that it's starting to get a little bit lighter in the days, and so the light of Christ begins to grow. So those two things happening together, which is rather wonderful. So with that in mind, we carry on praying for Anton's sister Jana, who had a major operation. Thank God it was very successful. Joachim, who's continuing to do well, thank God. Nicholas, and for young Daniel. This is miraculous actually. They sent Daniel home last Christmas time saying, go and have some enjoyable days, make memories with your family, because you're coming to the end of your days. So now 6 months later, exactly 6 months later from Christmas, and Daniel is still alive. And he had a very expensive, very rare, treated bone marrow thingamajig, what do you call it, transfusion the other day. So right now, young Daniel will be feeling very, 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 very poorly. So please keep him in your prayers today, and keep on knocking on heaven, saying to, let the boy live. It will be, I know this is a very worldly thing, but for me personally, it would be an enormous pleasure to discover that Daniel has gone back to playing football, has gone off to university. He has a place to study, I think, mathematics here in Lincoln, and it'd be wonderful to hear that he had taken up that place soon. So please keep him in your prayers. Carry on praying for Judy, and for Dino's Simon, and for Erin's Joseph, who is also going through a very tough stage at the moment. Illness left him with many other illnesses due to the treatment, from what I can gather. And he now has great problems with circulation and great problems in one of his feet, and he could lose his foot. So please pray for Joseph and for Elizabeth, who seems to be doing well at the moment. Okay, lots to pray for. There are lots of other people to pray for. Our days must be filled with prayer. Us ourselves, keeping God constantly in the forefront of our minds, so we do not sin. And all of us forget God. All of us find something preferable to God. And when we do that, we sin. Whatever it might be. So, okay, well, actually, preferable to God is looking at nasty films. Preferable to God is thinking unpleasant things. I prefer to God being self-centered, and so on. So when we forget God, then we sin. So keep God in your mind, pray for other people, do good. What else is being said? Aha, Foxy Lord. I wonder if Foxy Lord is who I think it might be. I wonder when the shops will stock cards and trimmings. Better rush out straight away in case they get sold out. God bless you, Brother Rob. Yeah, please be praying. And right, good night then, Miss Connie. Have a good day, everybody else. The sun has come out. That's very nice. And with any luck, it's going to be a good day. So keep it a good day. If you like this, you can always put a thumbs up underneath here. If you really like it, you can share it with other people. If you really like it, you can click on subscribe and the little bell, and then you'll be told when it's coming on. And there we go. Okay, your prayers. God bless you and keep you. Happy continuing feasts. Are we lucky? The Orthodox Church is full of feasts. Bye-bye. Lord have mercy.